Welcome, everyone. My name is Silvia Di Blasio, and I represent the Work That Reconnects Network. Thank you for joining us for the Webinars and Conversation Cafe series, where we are offering a wide range of rich educational and supportive opportunities for our global community of Work That Reconnects facilitators, members, and friends of the network. Our intention is to strengthen the web of the Work That Reconnects community while continually reaching beyond our current edges to weave deeper connections with others who are contributing to the great turning in diverse and complementary ways. Next slide, please. It is my great pleasure to introduce Sarah Nahar, Mutima Imani, Aravinda Ananda, and Rachel Marco Havens as the presenters of today's webinar, White Supremacy in the Great Turning. As African and American women with a deep commitment to the Work That Reconnects, they will share with us how they experience white supremacy showing up in the Work That Reconnects, while exploring ways to dismantle oppression with our work and to make a space for all to engage in the Great Turning more fully. Thank you.
The word we will begin with today is a word of acknowledgement. The words that come before all else in the region where I'm currently living, the seat of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, a group of people in a place that deeply influence the work that reconnects, are words of gratitude. So we are grateful to be here together, wherever we are. And those of us who are sharing today found it important still to do a land acknowledgement of sorts, even though it feels like during all these meetings and COVID and all these meetings on Zoom, it's as if the meetings are floating. But yet we are all in a particular place. And so may this land acknowledgement, which will also include a labor and date acknowledgement, reach you wherever you are today. So I want to acknowledge the land here where I am, in the watershed of the Great Lakes, on Turtle Island, and the many more than human beings that have been blooming, decaying, and stirring and stewarding this place for a very long time. And acknowledge the peoples growing out from this environment, for whom in perpetuity understood their role to care and be a part of it. Here, that is the Onondaga Nation, capital seat of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I invite you now just to say the name of any of the plants and the people that you know for about 10 seconds. You'll stay on mute, but trust that your voice carries and holds your intention in gratitude for them. We also want to acknowledge that the servers through which our technology is mediated sit on Indigenous land throughout Turtle Island, much of that land unceded, and parts of sovereign nations now used in service of the growing technocracy. We acknowledge where those servers are, and we acknowledge the minerals used, particularly thinking of the Democratic Republic of the Congo today, the people and land there from which these rare minerals are mined that allow us to connect. We ask that everything we do today be an honor and a blessing to the past, present, and future elders of these places. We also acknowledge, as we move into August, headed towards the dates of August 6th and August 9th, and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We recognize all who struggled then and who continue to struggle now to bring us back from the brink of total annihilation on the global scale, and those who are working each and every day to notice and bear witness to the small annihilations of life that are constant. So we offer our grief, and we offer our spirits inclined together to recognize that the struggle of the earth and the struggle of the people are one. The struggle of the earth and the struggle of the people are one. Welcome to this moment to talk about white supremacy and the Great Turning. And as we continue to ground, hand it over to my comrade, Mutima Imani. Mutima has internet connectivity issues, and she will be back soon. And I hope that that time of silence was also a grounding moment for you. Just a reminder that the webinar is recorded, and if we have further tech issues, we will just be using it as an invitation to slow down and learn. Some of my friends who work in Led to Life talk about the technological glitches as the ancestors watching and playing with us, teasing us a little bit, and inviting us to remember that nothing can stop our connection, and just take some time sometimes. So we'll wait here a little bit more, see if there's some space.
All
Come back
right.
on.
Thank
And
you.
here she is. Welcome back.
Oh, I love that moment of silence, though. It was really beautiful. It allowed me to collect myself even more and ground myself. So I'd like to say welcome to everyone that's here. And I'd like to do a shorter version of a grounding. So when Sarah was talking, the song, "Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground." So I'm going to ask you to do that. To root yourself in your place in the great turning. And I want you to know that all of you, all the roles, all the hats, all the ways that you show up are welcome in this space. I want you to begin to think about what we all have in common. And I think we all believe that the great turning is happening. And boy, do we see it now. People all over the world are standing up. And can you imagine the power of the realization that we are turning from unsustainability to sustainability as we hear the chant, Black Lives Matter. So take a deep breath and let us come together collectively in what we have in common to prepare ourselves to hear about our differences and then turn. It's a gift to be turning together. Welcome. We're going to take the time now to introduce ourselves, and I'm going to ask Rachel to introduce herself first.
Am I here? Can you hear me? Hello, all. I am really honored to be here, and there's something beautiful about you handing the mic to me in this circle today, which brings me back to my first visit with the Work That Reconnects, which I'll talk about later. But I was born and raised in the Catskills, as they call them here, on Lenape land, and grew up here most of my life. A lot of my life I left. It's sort of like the stretching thing, game play that's happened throughout my life that has me leaving, and I always come back to this land. And on this land where I live is a Tibetan Buddhist monastery. The main seat of His Holiness Karmapa is here. I grew up watching his Gompa be built, and I spent so much of my life sort of doing this inner work. I was raised in a metaphysical bookstore in the middle of Woodstock, New York, I was selling the New Age to Woodstock, right? So I grew up this sort of bizarrely aware and jaded, strange being that like went out into this world and have always been able to dip my toes and my feet into the beauty of diversity from this wide open mind space that never realized the privilege of that fully until later in life. And so it's caused me to look a lot at how I've walked in the world and how much work I have or haven't done. And the water brought me to this work, which then eventually brought me to the Work That Reconnects. Through youth engagement, it was actually super young people that brought me here. And Annie spotted me. I don't know how it happened. I emailed her in relationship to an organization I was working with, and she said, I think you should come to this this retreat at Ghost Ranch. And I did. I think that was 2016, right after coming back from Standing Rock. Also going right into, it was the week before, leading up to the T Words inauguration. And so it was like a really deep time, and a lot of things awoke for me about many different places in my life. And so, and somehow now I'm here. I ended up from there in these incredibly beautiful conversations around the evolving edge. And so now I'm here. I'm not a facilitator, but the Work That Reconnects has definitely been connecting me to many different aspects of the work I've been doing. And I'm so happy to be here. And I pass to Aravinda.
Thanks, Rachel. Just taking a moment to unmute myself there. Greetings. My name is Aravinda Ananda. I use she or they pronouns, and I live in Pecosset homelands of the Massachusetts people, outside the city of Boston in the Northeast Turtle Island, United States. I call my work, my life's work, Living Revolution, which is looking at helping to shift human relationships to be more life-affirming and life-sustaining, so very much in line with the Great Turning. I also do a fair amount of Work That Reconnects facilitation. I'm a member of the InterHelp Council, which is a Northeast United States Work That Reconnects network, and have been on the co-facilitation team for a program called the Earth Leadership Cohort, which is an immersion in the Work That Reconnects for young folks age 18 to 30. There have been 5 of them so far, and they've been a real educational learning opportunity for me. The first one happened in 2014, and it was a real wake-up call for me. Of the 15 participants, 14 identified as white and only 1 identified as a person of color. And the participant of color withdrew after the first meeting. And it was a real wake-up call for me to better attend to how oppression is operating and Work That Reconnects spaces and the white dominance of the space. And I've just been on a learning journey ever since. So I came to a place of feeling like I couldn't continue to be a facilitator of something called Work That Reconnects if I wasn't attending to things that were happening in workshop spaces, dynamics, and I'm really grateful to have been invited to join this panel today, and particularly grateful to be in wider conversation with the broader Work That Reconnects community. I don't know how a great turning is possible to life-sustaining civilization without dismantling the death culture of white supremacy. So just really grateful for this opportunity to share space, and hope that it's of service towards healing. Sarah, I believe I'm passing to you now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Great to be with you all. My name is Sarah Nahar. I am the descendant of both willing and unwilling settlers that moved to Potawatomi land, Elkhart, Indiana. I learned about the Work That Reconnects in about 2013 while I was leading a third-party nonviolent intervention group that goes where we're invited around the world, leveraging the power of nonviolent direct action for deep change. And I was serving as executive director of Christian peacemaker teams at that time, and knew that I needed a depth of spiritual practice to ground me in administrative leadership, and so was invited to participate in the second People of Color cohort that was being hosted at Canticle Farm in Oakland, California, and so came in to deeper facilitation training and work at that time. I've since continued a lot of the work of integrating the Work That Reconnects with nonviolent direct action training for these times, as it's been my experience and philosophy that we can only go as far externally as we go internally, and we can only go as far internally as we go externally. So through that dynamic process, have enjoyed connecting with many others who may not have access to or knowledge about the weekend workshop format, but who are spiritual activists in other ways. And one of those connections has been through Buddhist Peace Fellowship, was introduced to that through Belinda Griswold, also who I met at one of the Work That Reconnects intensives, and now have the opportunity to serve there on the board. And looking at the transformation with holding actions, transforming our common structures, and shifting consciousness into block, build, and be, and their formulation, inspired by engaged Buddhism and other spiritual activists. That's been one of the major ways I've been working with the Work That Reconnects, and also with the Anti-Oppression and Resource Group, part of the Evolving Edge work. And currently I'm doing a PhD in religion at Syracuse University and in environmental studies at State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. Those are right next to each other. And during the application process, I learned that also Joanna is a graduate of the religion department at Syracuse University. So that was a very interesting phenomenon. But the more I am up here, and I see a few of my neighbors here on the call, and we facilitate together in this, the more I can see the fingerprints of this place and the folks here on the work. And yeah, I'm trying to build a joint PhD program because, that's the reconnection needed. Religion and environmental studies were not necessarily separated until the Industrial Growth Society got a hold of them. So that's who I am, and it's good to be here with y'all today.
Thank you. What a dynamic team. I'm so honored to be a part of it. I'm going to take a moment to introduce myself to you. I have been a diversity consultant and trainer for over 35 years. I got trained by a guy named Price Cobbs, who wrote the book Black Rage in the early 80s. So as part of the first consulting team to go into Fortune 500 companies, basically saying, hey, can we all get along? So I just wanted to say that when we went into those companies, we would always start with a bottom dollar line. You're losing money because women and minorities are not feeling appreciated. So it was driven by the industrial growth complex to say, oh, we've got to learn how to incorporate women and people from the global majority. I don't say people of color anymore. Because we're bringing them in, we're training them, and then they're leaving us because they're not feeling valued, they're not feeling seen, they're not feeling heard. I have a master's in public administration. The emphasis is phenomenology, how all things work together. So I'm trained as a systems thinker, and I'm also a religious science minister, which is about metaphysics. And so I did all of that at the same time, and it was very, very exciting to begin to see the world through a single lens. And then I come to discover that in Africa, which is my roots, I ended up on Turtle Island because my people were captured and enslaved. That in Africa, when the Europeans got there and they said, do you believe in God? Oh yes, God's in the trees, God's in the sun, God's in the land. That they said, oh, you heathens, you believe that God is everywhere, and didn't understand the significance of understanding the oneness of the power of the presence of the divine. And I'm also a facilitator with the facilitator Work That Reconnects network. Molly Brown, who I think is on the call, and Constance and I have joined together, and we're in our third year actually getting facilitators ready, to creating a learning environment so that people who want to go out and do the work can do the work. And it's so exciting. And if we could give people a PhD, the amount of work you have to do to get through the program is worth a PhD. And we're looking for a place to allow those kind of units to come. And right now we've only made arrangements for some of the, some people to have units to go towards a master's program. The only other thing that I'll say is that I lived at Canticle Farm with Annie and Joanna as the root teacher of this, and I worked with her when when the Evolving Edge group just started. We've changed our names now. And so I've been right with Joanna through the awareness that social justice issues and the issues of Gaia are the same issues. And that awareness is still being digested. And that's basically what we're doing with the work that the Facilitation Development Program is bringing the decolonizing, the inclusion, the diversity pieces into the work so that anyone who is actually doing the work can have the skills to include and to honor whoever's in the room. So that's my introduction. And so I want to start just to talk about white supremacy in the Great Turning, which is still shocking people to be able to even be called white. I remember a conversation at one 10-day intensive where someone says, well, I'm not racist. And I said, yes, you are. And then somebody else says, well, there's levels of racism. So whatever level we're at, and I'm talking to all of us because the way that I grew up, my father was in the service. I lived in Okinawa and in French Morocco as a little girl. So I was out of the United States for my first 8 years. And when I got back, and I heard the word nigger in Okinawa, but I didn't know what it meant. And when I got back, we were the second Black family to move into Apple Valley. And the KKK came on Friday nights and wrote the word nigger on the garage so many times. And then I got, oh, it has something to do with the color of my skin. And my parents actually never said anything because they thought that they were protecting us. And so when I realized that I was being treated differently because of the skin color, I began to understand that there were all kinds of levels of racism. I had teachers who thought I was brilliant, encouraged me, and I had teachers who thought I couldn't learn at all. And I played into whatever was presented to me, to tell you the truth. And so it's such an honor to be working with the Leading Edge and looking at the awakening of all people that we've been decolonized, that we have hardly any original thoughts, that when we look at it, we are like, I want to use the word computers, that input is coming in all the time. And we have to realize that that input is slanted towards white is right, white is superior, white is the only place that wealth is needed or is intended. So I want to ask Aravinda to talk for a moment about the gathering that we had in Woodby Island on Belinda's land. What I know about it is that Sarah, who's on the call, Jade, Belinda, Barbara Jefferson, and Aravinda all came together and started to look at what other facilitators were saying. They were saying, we can't do this exercise because people from different cultures, different walks of life are not feeling included and they're ending up feeling harmed. And I was there with Annie saying, let us not drop any of the exercises. Let's expand to include people. Expand to include people. So I'm just going to ask you, until I see Aravinda come back online, to begin to think about what does it take for you to expand and include the realities of, and we could do it within the spiral, the realities of the pain that we see that other people are experiencing because they are left out of the narrative. because they are dealing with systematic exclusion and internal dominance and internalized oppression. So I hope that some of you were able to actually read the articles that were given in preparation of this. And if you haven't, I would ask you to go back and keep those articles very close to you, because it really gives an explanation of really what white supremacy is and how it shows up. But I would imagine that those of you who identify as white are beginning to have the rose-colored glasses that might have kept you from seeing the suffering being cleaned off now. And those of us who are the people of the global majority are also awakening to our conditioning to step back and to take mistreatment, to be ignored, to stay in a place, not to, and especially for me, I've got to watch my tone of voice and make sure it doesn't have too much a charge in it, because then I become the angry Black woman. So we have a lot to unravel as we move into this imaginary, because it's imaginary now, but if the root teacher says if we can imagine it, it can actually happen. So imagining together, how do we begin to open our hearts to include people from different cultures so that our world isn't just all white or all of the blood that's running through our veins, but really looking at all of our sisters and brothers. And how do we begin to open our heart and tell the truth about the pain? Robin DiAngelo says that when she realized that she was raised not to interact with people who were different than her, that she realized that she had been robbed and had a really hard time, a lot of sadness about the fact that she was missing out on so much richness. And so this piece of opening our heart is absolutely necessary for the Great Turning. And my work, which I call Healing the Heart of Humanity, one heart at a time, one person at a time, really is about forgiveness. And so I wrote a poem saying, I forgive you, America, my brother who's fallen out of grace into sin. Because when I look back, I see people dying, my people hanging from the trees, babies crying, mothers suffering. And now I take back my power and I dream and think and call forth a democracy that includes everybody. And I love Cohen's song that democracy is coming to America. It's not here yet, y'all. It's not here yet, y'all. And anytime a foundation is built on a premise that is not true, everything else after that has a glitch. So in my mind, that's the first glitch. We don't have democracy. And I think I'm preaching to the choir, because those of us who are looking at the unraveling and understanding the industrial growth complex and what it has done, it is at the root of colonizing our minds to think the way that we think and act the way that we act. It's based upon the lie that democracy is here. So it's going to, how to say, it's going to take every one of us to do our small part. And that's what I got from Canticle Farm. What is it that is ours to do? What is it that is ours to do? And I thank you for coming, because I believe that you're here because you know that you have a part. And so I'm going to turn it to Aravinda. I'm going to turn it over to you now, Aravinda. Are you ready?
Yeah, thanks, Mutima, and thank you for all that you shared. You asked me to speak to some pieces of history, so I can touch on a few of those pieces, and I'll just start there. So yeah, I had the honor of being able to convene with some other facilitators wanting to look at harm that was happening in Work That Reconnects spaces in person. And I attended 3 gatherings on the west coast of Turtle Island. I live on the east coast, and at the time wasn't flying to minimize my emissions, so made the great cross-continental trip by train, which was an interesting experience for sure. Yeah, the first time was in the fall of 2016, and Mutima was referring to that, when a group of mostly people who were regularly facilitating the work got together to look at different practices within the Work That Reconnects and framing, to look at some places in which oppression was showing up. So following out of that convening, a group of facilitators started to, mostly facilitators, not only facilitators, started meeting on an ongoing basis to look at both framing and practices. And we'll share a few places that we've identified with that, just stuff that's built into the Work That Reconnects. And also a lot of the learning has been around the conditioning that each one of us brings to the Work That Reconnects as facilitators, because of the conditioning of the societies that we live in. And so, yeah, it's a very long, I think, journey of learning and unlearning within myself, within each one of us, to see how white supremacy is showing up within us and within the spaces that we're in. As a facilitator, we each have certain responsibilities and power within the group. And so to return back to naming a few pieces about history, another gathering that I got to participate in and on the West Coast, I co-organized with Mutima, and it was in February 2018. And that was an opportunity for folks to get together and really look at naming some patterns of harm. And so I just wanted to lift up one in particular, which is of facilitators ignoring harm when it's happening. And so since we're focusing on white supremacy now, it could be something like a racial microaggression happens, and there's often a tendency for facilitators to just keep going with the pre-planned agenda. So we had an opportunity earlier to pause with additional silence and the time of the grounding. And so that's been a tool that I've really been working on developing and growing in myself, like a muscle. Like I had a lot of conditioning to just like ignore stuff because I would freak out and not know what to do. And so like, I still don't entirely know what to do, but I'm working on like building that muscle with that tool of like pausing when something happens, and then just like tuning in and sensing what might I do? Instead of ignoring it, like what would be a helpful way to name this? And sometimes I find that it's helpful to name it in the whole group. Sometimes I want to check with the people who are directly impacted because they may not want the attention of the whole group on them. And so sometimes I'll bring it up at a break time or something like that. Another tool that I use as a facilitator is getting people into pairs and saying, hey, let's just process like what's coming up for you, what's going on right now. So those are just a few tips of ways to not continue with that pattern of ignoring harm when it's happening. That's like facilitator perspective. I know not everybody on this call is necessarily facilitating regularly, but it's a real passion and calling on me to really support people who do facilitate Work That Reconnects, to really be able to hold harm when it happens. And so that's another structural thing that we can do, those of us who are facilitating, is set up some expectations at the start of our time together with how we want to be together when harm happens, and normalize that it's okay to speak up about it. And that can be really hard. and really scary, especially if you have any kind of marginalized identities, because the pushback can be fierce and strong when people name harm. So it's yeah, intense. Another piece that I wanted to be sure to just name in the comments that I'm making right now is about white supremacy centering the comfort, needs, and experience of white folks. And so in preparation for this call, I was chatting with Mutima, and like I caught myself like, oh, am I gonna like prepare my comments in the vein of like educating white folks about how white supremacy is happening and Work That Reconnects spaces? Or do I want to gear my comments more to, as Mutima, you refer to, people of the global majority and what the experience is? Because if you have privilege in a system, you often may not notice something. And if you're oppressed in a system, it's your daily lived experience. So it's not about learning about it. It's a different struggle. So I wanted to speak to this piece of white dominance with the work, within the Work That Reconnects, both in terms of a demographic that I have often seen show up at Work That Reconnects spaces. In the Northeast where I live, often most of the people in the room are white folks. And that's a really intense environment, very white dominant in terms of demographic. There are also some ways in which framing in the Work That Reconnects has also been white dominant in some ways, or I could use the word of Eurocentric. So one example of that would be a previous version of the practice called Harvesting the Gifts of the Ancestors, which is looking at a long ancestral journey. And a previous version of that practice was referring more to experiences that would be relatable to European folks who traveled to the Americas than many of the other people on the planet. And so Anne-Marie Davis is a Black woman who rewrote another version of that to be more inclusive of lots of different perspectives. So that's just one example of looking at a place in the framing of the Work That Reconnects that can be changed to not be excluding folks and to be including of more folks. I guess the last thing I'll say is that one of the real learning and growing edges for me is being attentive to my fight, flight, freeze, appease responses. And so when I notice a white supremacy dynamic operating in a Work That Reconnects space, a lot of my habit is to freeze and shut down. And that makes it really hard to actually name and intervene in the moment. And so I'm working with that pattern of freezing and unfreezing. And a recent learning for me last fall that felt really significant was just this piece of setting myself up with a lot of support and not hating on myself for freezing, but like setting myself up with more support to work on unfreezing and being able to speak up and name and intervene in the moment. And what feels really significant for me as a facilitator, because I'm newer in some of my journey with undoing oppression, is to not expect myself to be able to do too many things at a time. And so like it can be a lot to keep track of content as a facilitator and also process, and then also be tracking dynamics that are unfolding in the room. And so it's so helpful for me to be a part of facilitation teams that are robust and people have different roles, and also to partner and work with people who have a little bit more skill than I do and like noticing, naming, interrupting, transforming. And so that I'm taking responsibility for myself and also not expecting myself to have to do everything. So I just highly recommend working together with others and supporting one another in our learning. And I really appreciate in Sarah Nahar's article, and your article, Sarah, how you just tell people like, you don't have to get it all right the first time, but like keep showing up for this work. So Mutima, did you want to say more things before we pass it to Sarah? Okay, all right. So thanks to y'all for listening, and Sarah, I'm passing to you.
Thank you so, so much. Wow. Just invite anyone, if you've learned anything or resonate with anything that's said so far, just go ahead and give a twinkle or a tap on the body or a little rub down or whoo. One of the responses that can come with a fight, flight, feign, freeze, appease, these types of things is also fall asleep. So if you're seeing yourself sleepy, sometimes it's not only the time of day, but the brain sometimes can react to hard information by shutting down and making you sleepy. So we're just gonna just kind of wake ourselves up again and just for this next little round, Rachel and I will speak and then we will have time for a bio break. Woo. Where I want to pick up is on the image of the facilitator working with the harm that is in the room and flowing through the room. Sometimes when the innovation of group agreements has come, initially it's posed that this is how we want to make sure harm doesn't happen here. So a great intention. However, through these layers of work, I've been invited and we're inviting people to know that harm is always and already happening. And we have some tools to deal with that. Honor our pain for the world. I mean, it's built into the Work That Reconnects where we can hold grief and celebration and being energized and contemplation all together. So I think it's a strength of this modality and why many of us are drawn to it. But just a recognition that since harm is already happening, what group agreements can help us do is then say, and now what? What might we try as practices here together? And particularly as facilitators, Aravinda mentioned getting additional support. That might look like naming your plan. So just to draw on what you said, Aravinda, you may say to the group if you're facilitating, if there's harm happening, you may see me freeze for a moment. I am okay. I'm just freezing. And my goal here as I facilitate you all is to come out of that freeze. And by the way, I do have a support, and you can name that person who is there to support and hold space, for example. And this is what I will do. I will then name it, or I might check with you one-on-one, or I might have us go into a share pair. So that is kind of a mode of transparent facilitation that comes from some other modalities, but without too many words, because I'm not trying to create a situation of teacher talk in which it's difficult to follow why the facilitator is saying something. What I'm hoping this would do, and you would need to practice these words before. You need to identify your own pattern before, and then figure out a way how you might explain it in a few words. And what you're letting the group know is that you're also welcoming the conflict and tension that will arise. And although you may have a reaction, that reaction won't have the last word in the workshop. That's it. They'll be invited into working on it as part of the Work That Reconnects itself. Another thing that can be done is another facilitator to support watching process for others. So sometimes when I'm facilitating, I won't be that transparent depending on the group that I'm facilitating and my personality and positionality vis-a-vis that group. I may not be as transparent, but I may call in and assist in someone watching and doing that process work, so that as I may continue with a particular activity, I know I've got support to tend while that activity is happening, and to give me a clue from a different angle than the facilitator how we might pause a little later. So what I think this shows is it breaks down a little bit the expert culture, or of the one facilitator in the room guiding people through this. It critiques the guruization, let's say, also that can happen. And as people are there projecting on you as a facilitator and really coming with a lot of needs that you certainly cannot meet all of. But you also, again, depending on your personality and positionality, may or may not be one of the most powerful people in the room. But if you state, what you are willing to be, that you are willing to, that you are there in a sense of your own power, and that your passion is to care for the whole, then people know what your agenda is. What I'm hinting at here, folks, is I can't tell you how many workshops I've been with white women facilitators who say, I don't have any power. You group are deciding, and are abdicating their power when they clearly have power. This is a confusing move. And I do not feel confident to speak what I'm feeling to someone who does not have an understanding of their own power. I am relying on you when I am a participant to hold your own, to take up the space that you are. And I find it really helpful. Now you may not be as a fierce or as kind of, sometimes I have a bit of a hardness that intersperses with more tenderness, because I'm trying to communicate the fierce urgency of the moment and the gentle hope that I have for the world. You have your own vibe, but I just want to invite you to come with it, so that others hopefully will feel the permission to come with theirs. Mm-hmm. Joanna and Joanna's work was formed in a time of great movement, of social movements. And so I think that the work that reconnects as we move along is strongest when it's connected to the movements that are happening around blocking harm, building alternatives, and being in alignment with our deepest values. And so I would invite you as facilitators to keep up on what's happening in the movement, various aspects of it, so that we can land, so to speak, what is happening in the workshops in a significant way. And movements, be they religious ones, which I think are as long, centuries-long social movements, or other particular movements for national, political, civil rights, or whatever is on top for people, but also connecting with kind of the fundamental human rights, can help really anchor what we're doing in an environmental justice way of being or movement. That's kind of the one I'm speaking about now. And we think about some of the first waves of that, learning from David Pello in his book, Critical Environmental Justice, talks a lot about colonization as a series of environmental injustices. And so it's not as if things were going okay, and then now since the 50s, we've had a deterioration. But the very acts of colonization were acts of environmental injustice. These are wounds and wounds against people and earth, as well as the mindset, the manomaya, right? The mind creations and projections of extractive ways of being. And if I think about resistance then to colonization in any form, early abolition movements, all of these could be framed as environmental justice movements, and kind of speeding up to the 70s and the 80s when some of the human potential folks are meeting, and this modality currently is being birthed. There was ambivalence sometimes within that movement about how much human difference, race, class, gender, sexuality, national origin, carceral status, all these beautiful human differences that we have, how much of that really mattered. There was some ambivalence in the movement. And there's also ambivalence around what is most strategic to address and at what scale. Do we look at the biggest, most fearsome, most intense threats to life, or because that is so big and hard to understand, do we focus on how to address the leak from the local landfill and really get on that and focus? And sometimes, rather than deep appreciation for people who worked at different scales, there was a lot of tension. And I'm speaking these ambivalences because I think they show up in the work that reconnects and those of us drawn to these workshops throughout these eras. A third ambivalence would be the state and the role of the state and how we imagine, quote unquote, getting back on track, which, by the way, is an industrial revolution analogy. That's why we don't want to railroad each other, you see. Anyway, this question of the state has shown up in the most recent version, I think, with people bemoaning what's happening with Trump and yearning for 2015. I'm not yearning for 2015. I'm not even yearning for 1915. You know, I mean, not that, I mean, time is a nonlinear construct, and you know, but the sense of this nostalgia is a let's say projection of white comforts to a particular moment. And I think this is where analysis of something like the doctrine of discovery, and again, the resistance to colonization as a movement, and abolition as a long movement, can help us think about how do we think beyond the state, through the state, around the state, because the state has not been a protector of all of us, and especially now as we see more and more baldly the state's collaboration with corporate capital, in the intertwined ways that those are, we have more power and creativity to think around beyond the state. But the movement that we've inherited made significant appeals to the state to come and fix things because it was their responsibility. And the movements rose up, including civil rights, to say, we shouldn't have to be doing this. This is y'all's job. This is why we elected you. So that was a third ambivalence that we've inherited. And then there also, at some point, seemed to be a belief that if we let those with institutional power know, they would reduce the harm and stop. And it's becoming ever more clear to ever more amounts of people, though many have known for a long time, that we are expendable, and that we can no longer really hope that by identifying the pain of our experience, that there will be a level of care or a commitment or a seeing of how consumptive society is consuming us. So we sit with an additional grief now at the rate of expendability, as we talk about the mass extinction, and the rates of the killing of Indigenous and Black folks, and the rates of the killing of land and environmental defenders around the world. It is clear that these rates are accelerating and not decelerating, and that we're highly expendable. So the question of human difference, the question of scale, the question of the state, and the question of expendability are ambivalences I think we have inherited and show up in our work in the Great Turning. And so I would invite, as we address white supremacy, which is the motor of all of those, that we deeply embrace the human difference that comes as we pull back the layers of what it means to be a part of the Great Turning, to block harm, and build alternatives, and be in alignment with our deepest values. That we welcome that difference and not see it as a challenge in our workshops, but as a prize and a benefit to the workshop space or wherever you're facilitating. And that we develop analysis coming in that really take very deeply this image in front of coming back to life, and it's one of a fractal. And we have a great allyship and learning from ecosystems on how we understand scale. And so an invitation as a facilitator, if someone is speaking on a very particular scale, to maybe help connect with others and the stories of those who are not maybe impacted in that particular way, because perhaps they're not an immigrant person who is working in a factory and speaking their experience. As a facilitator, you can use scale to help make a connection, not to make a universal statement, but to help people connect with moments and feeling of exploitation, loneliness, not being heard. So you can scale into the like feelings and needs level, and also helping that person feel heard. And in our workshops, I think we already do a really great job, just really coming through with a nod to the engaged Buddhist tradition that says it's not just about one campaign or not just about recruiting you to what I'm doing, but the many myriad ways that we seek change internally and externally are welcome. And so there's already not much of a reliance on the state or as much nostalgia, but when you're hearing some of this, inviting people to remember that the state is no savior. And particularly when we're doing this work in the US, both for Indigenous folks who I would say have been practicing many forms of direct democracy for a long time, but have not been so included in the US form. And also the way the United States itself acts around the world claiming democracy, but as Mutima was saying, not yet. That's not what's been happening. So just a recognition of the power of the state to harm and being able to name those. And speaking the depth, fourthly, speaking the depth of the indispensability of everyone in the workshop and all of us in life. And this doesn't mean just a utilitarian indispensability that we all have just a role. We need to do that, but the depth of intrinsic belonging. And sometimes what can happen in a workshop is if I feel that I'm actually an expendable part of that workshop, that I'm there because I bring some color or some entertainment or maybe a new perspective that tickles someone's imagination. If I feel expendable, I will get reactive. And then it will be hard, whether or not I express that reactivity, it'll be hard to allow myself to come in and drop the guards down. And part of where that expendability can be felt is the beings of the people of the global majority in workshop spaces do not necessarily relieve the tensions. And some people come to these workshops to feel their tension relieved and to have a safe space from the difficulties. And what do? We bring the problems closer. And we remind people that the very workshop we're in is a mirror of the very world that we're a part of. And this can scare people, but it's a gift, it's an offering, and a recognition that what's happening in the world is happening in the workshop, and to not deny that, but to see any healing that may happen in the workshop or any ability to hold conflict and tension within the workshop can then indeed be a model for what we want to see in the broader movement. Thank you.
I just got unmuted. Is that my turn? Hi, everyone. Wow, there's so much going through my mind, and I I made a really clear point to not focus on where I was coming from or what I might say in this time, because I am not a facilitator of the Work That Reconnects. And there have been times when I've been that gal, right? Going, wow, what am I? I'm here. Am I expendable? Who am I? Where did I come from? What am I offering to this circle, right? And yet I am always reminded by the community that I have been in direct contact with for the last 4 years, how important my voice is. And so I'm not sure if I can give particular answers or guidance on how to directly take this, but I feel like there's been so much information and so much shared here that I'm just going to tell you a little story about my experience in this, with this community. I was coming out of a few years of really deep, accidental, in total immersion in the nonprofit industrial complex. I was exhausted. I had watched very many young people in the, the thing that's interesting, and when we talk about marginalization, youth is an interesting one because I work with young people, and because it's a fleeting marginalization, there's an interesting take on how young people are perceived in this work. So I was really coming out of a lot of a hard time of really watching the nonprofit industrial complex eat myself, my young partner in action, a lot of other young people up, and then just spit them out. And I had been very confused a lot by a lot of this sort of, I was learning a lot because I had spent my 20s in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery, like I mentioned, up the hill. I had been so focused on my own inner work, and then my son came into my life, and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, you better focus outward more now. And it just kind of came, and it was natural, and it was a very much a direct hit on the environment in my community that brought me into the work. And so suddenly I'm flung into this work, and by the time I ended up at Ghost Ranch, I was on the last legs of my time with this organization, and I was exhausted, and somehow I just was offered this opportunity, and I was offered an opportunity with a scholarship. And so it's not normal that I would be just like end up at Ghost Ranch out in New Mexico there, flown there in a beautiful space and this beautiful opportunity to just dig in. And for me, like, while raised around progressive white people, I'm the one who shared that the pre-conversation peek at Ijoma Olo's Drowning in Whiteness. That was my life, right? And I hadn't really realized how much I was focusing my energy in this place of vigilance around how other people would perceive me, whose house I was allowed to go to, and I'm coming up a very light-skinned brown girl, but in a 96% white community who thought they were as progressive as you could possibly get. And so by the time I ended up like popping out of this circle, this upbringing, and then I ended up and I'm sitting in this circle of these people who had come, and it was probably like 40 people, and it was an intensive, and there was a few others that I could relate to. I didn't join the environmental local group. I joined the people of the Global Majority Caucus, right? And I was feeling like completely, like everything stripped for me. Like I was feeling super bare in this room. And I found myself looking around at one point, and I can't even tell you what it was and what the conversation was. And I think it was around how could the community come together to support each other. Joanna was there when the times got real hard, like when the tumultuousness, when we really got, how are we going to take care of each other? And I'm looking around this room, and I'm listening to the things that are people saying, and I'm going, nothing you're all talking about has any relevance to me, to what I would need in my life, to the safety that I would need the people around me to care about my safety. There were so many things and these ideas, and I just basically wept. I looked around this room, I said, you know what? I can't relate to most of you. I'm here on a scholarship. I don't have money to throw at people. I'm not about status. I was raised in a community I was raised in America, completely understanding culture, celebrity culture, right? And so I'm in this world looking around and I see this incredible woman, Joanna Macy's amazing. My work has been like taking care of lineage holders in a monastery, right? That's like what I grew up doing. My father is a lineage holder. I'm a lineage holder of it. So my whole life I'm going, and I'm sitting in this room and I'm looking at all these people and they're worshiping this beautiful being. But I have a tendency to pull away from guru worship, even though I'm sitting at the feet of these high lamas and feeding them every day. The whole point is to remove our ego. And I'm sitting in this room and I'm looking at these people and they're all going, ah, and I'm like, not everybody, but like there was a striking place of like, we're talking about how are we going to shift the world, and y'all just want to sit at the feet of this woman, and we have work to do. And I just wept, going, what are we going to do, you guys? I don't know, but this is weird for me. And so everybody was like, wow, Rach is it? Who's this? What? You know, I was that person that went, and I didn't get into the guru worship, but I've been watching it as these conversations unfold around white supremacy and the work that reconnects, because I ended up in this conversation in a much deeper way. And I'm bringing all this up to say I am coming from kind of like a bit of a different view, because I'm not deeply embedded and trained within this work. It's just that this work speaks to my life's, how I was indoctrinated and domesticated, right? A lot of it makes so much sense for me, but I was raised on appropriative culture in Woodstock, New York, selling it to the people. Like, to me, pendulum swinging, who's a Mercury, that's who I am. It's all I know, right? And so I look into this work and into this world and into this, and I go, so many people are looking to make these shifts, and so many people are ready to walk into the shadows, and we really have to do it. And it's coming across so many places, and in all these conversations I'm being called to have this, to bring my, like, you know, the strength and vulnerability that also comes with this. I also am this powerful lion, you know, which one do you want, right? But the thing that keeps coming up for me is that even as we're breaking down, I've been on these, part of the anti-oppression work group is like, it's really going to be very difficult to retrofit me into a design that was designed to erase me. Now, I'm not saying Joanna's work was designed to erase me, but the big design, like that design, you just brought us there, right, Sarah? Like, that design did not include me. So now we can all run around and try to create like ways to patch it. But the truth is, it wasn't designed with me as part of it, with Sarah as part of it, with the youth, with the LGBTQ community, with the indigenous, like, and I got all of it in here. So I'm sitting there going, like, where am I ever going to fit in? And how are we going to do this led by the people who don't understand necessarily the design flaws? So, and then the fear that comes up, and then I'm going to step back, but the fear that I see coming up in so many around what happens if we let go of the reins. And what I want to say to you is, I know me and the tribal communities I was raised in, whether they were rainbow tribe, whether they were indigenous tribe, whether they were like family tribe, I was raised to include. And so what I would like to just support the people who are going, whoa, wait a minute, Anna, if you give us a minute, like we've been here designing designs, new ones, adding, taking from our ancestral, working with our indigenous communities, like we are actually built to include. So when people take a moment to let us breathe into helping design this next shift, you're gonna find a lot of inclusion. And I don't see too many people looking to exclude everyone in this next vision. Some may, but I don't think these are the circles that we're rolling in right now. And so I just hope that the community of in this circle does want to do this work in a way that actually allows, and this is what I work when I work with young people, I'm saying this to elders who really want to be elders. The young people are going to tell you that you're an elder, right? Like we become elders when the young people say, please, thank you, elder. I see the wisdom you're handing me and thank you for letting it go so that we can innovate on it. And this is, I'm going to wrap my conversation up to say that I was on a circle in our post Ghost Ranch, and a few people said they wanted to talk about the youth and how we can bridge these gaps. And I jumped in and I said, you know, here's my experience. And it was deep, but it was a lot around how much and how important it is for us to let go of those reins when we ask for the wisdom. If we don't do that, we are not sharing wisdom. We are telling people about what we know. And so when I brought that into the circle, it was ignored once, it was ignored again when we were in it, and it was ignored again. And basically at the end of these like 3 or 4 conversations with some young people saying, I can't be in there, they basically said, Rachel, you're like a broken record, deuces. And I left. And I have not heard from any of those people except for one who I'm friends with in that circle, because I was too hard on the reminding the fact that we hadn't gotten it, that we weren't doing that work. And so there is a part of me that has a little bit of fear of deep digging and spending my time ever again deeply surrounded by an entirely 90% non-melanated Work That Reconnects community. I was left going, oh my God, and I'm just here trying to fight for the kids. Just the kids. I'm not even talking about Black, brown, indigenous, anybody. So I'm not dumping this, and as I don't want to dump this, I just want to give you a little bit of my experiences, and the truth being this, I'm still here. There's a reason that I'm still here. There's a reason we're all here right now. There's work to do. We're gonna have to let go of a lot to get there. That's what I feel. And I don't know what when Mutima walked in that room, Mutima, you came late. Whenever it was that you arrived at Ghost Ranch, it was like, you know, it was like it was the biggest sigh of relief. And so I just want to say, like, as a person of color who's been a person of color, person of the global majority, who's been in these circles flung in, I'm still here. And I can definitely tell you that what's being brought by many others in this community, it's real. And it's important because this is powerful, beautiful work. Yeah. And I just want to say one more thing. Celebrity culture. That's one of America. I live on Turtle Island, but America's society, we really have to be careful about celebrity culture in activism, in facilitation, in teacher-student relationships. This is huge because it's actually what American current now culture is. That's what we can offer the world. So I just want to remind everyone why we're here.
Mutima, I think you have to mute yourself. I'm not able to do it.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say that what has come up for me as I've been listening to the wisdom that has been shared is that when we look at white supremacy, we're looking at all of the isms. It's not just racial. It is adultism, it's sexism, able-bodyism. So that the kind of concept of the colonizer, which is deep in white supremacy, sets up all of the isms. So I imagine that in the Great Turning, we're going to be looking for the tipping point. We're going to find it that dismantles all of the racism, so that we listen to the young people. We allow people who are not able-bodied to fully participate. We allow the sexism to dissolve itself, so that working relationships between men and women become better. So that's what came up when Rachel was sharing, is that, and me listening to Aravinda and Sarah, and I just wanted to say that. Thank you. So I'm going to do what Sarah had said as I'm passing it to Sarah, is to take a deep breath, and wherever you are, flight, fight, freeze, numb. Take a deep breath and feel your feet on the ground. Put your roots down, because you're here, and you being here is so important for this conversation. And of course, the white supremacy would show up in the work that reconnects. Sarah already said it. I'm just going to say that in a different way to drive the point home, is that because it exists, it's going to show up. Until we actually dismantle it, it's going to be with us. And to turn towards it, not to be afraid of it, to look at honoring the pain of it together. Because you know that when we actually honor our pain, we can see with new eyes. We can see with new eyes and go forth. So we have a formula that really works, and I'm excited that we are actually talking about it. That's the first step, communicating and talking about it.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Yes, thank you. We are right now at the bottom of the hour, and overall, this webinar will go to the top of the next hour, so for 30 more minutes. And right now is a moment to do a bio break, and we have just a little short piece of music to accompany that. A young one just singing out, "I Just Want to Live." And so just invite you to soak in that, and then we'll have about a minute afterwards, and the remainder of the time will be a little bit of sharing of one of the framing pieces that the Anti-Oppression Resource Group rewrote, and thinking together through question and answer, depending on where you want to take that. And then we will conclude by the top of the hour. If you need to depart at this time, it's always a risk when a facilitator says bio break. It's okay. We're willing to take it. This will be recorded for you, and you can pick it up as you are able. And in case some do need to depart, just want to thank everyone for the commitment of their time thus far, as well as of their treasure, and how this workshop, this moment here that we have, is supporting frontline communities, as well as supporting us who have been speaking so far. So thank you for helping to dedicate some of the merit and your treasure towards that work as well. Do not take that for granted. So I have a little moment for a bio break, and we'll be back in just a minute or two. Thank you.
I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live.
Those who I saw just rest in their eyes. Special blessing for the eyeballs today, if you're using them to connect with this space. As I just kind of come back in here, a little MC style. Just want to also just particularly as I mentioned the eyeballs, I want to just make visible to additional communities who are often rendered intensely expendable. We were able to get a message and comment in the chat, and I'll be reading that out. But want to also, as we acknowledge this date and having just passed the days of the passage of the American with Disabilities Act, the incredible grassroots, powerful movements of people of different abilities that brought to the realization the impact of ableism. In the built infrastructure, you'll want to be thinking about this. Where am I holding my workshop? Can everybody get there? Can most people get, just thinking about these things. And when there are barriers to inclusion, to be able to not deny that they are there, but to mourn that they are there and to begin to then think creatively about how to surmount them, about what needs to change. Perhaps the workshop form in and of itself needs to change as we think about how to offer this work and what we bring to it in an ever expansive way. So just want to name the impact of what I generally call the cis heteronormative white settler colonial monoamorous Christian hegemonic petrochemical corporate capital industrial gross society of death, the IGS for short, the intensity of that expendability. And also, we just wanted to really lift up, just that in the US context, so many Latinx and other people of marginalized identities are killed. In the case of Latinx immigrants, Juanita wrote this in, we are made to feel expendable by the largely US-driven extractive way of being and are then forced to migrate to the US, following the path of wealth, their wealth, that has been ripped from the territories and lands that have been stewarded for millennia. And Juanita writes, I know that we can't talk to everyone's realities, but this came to my heart as I heard only Black and Indigenous people being mentioned. Thank you, Juanita, for writing in from the Maya territories in Ixem Ulu in Guatemala. Muchísimas gracias por decir algo. It's always great to speak up, and people can bring in, make visible, always, especially as we continue to deepen our understanding of the nuances of how white supremacy impacts different populations, because it doesn't come down in the exact same way, but doesn't have to be same in order to be valid. There are so many ways that this pain is being endured, and the more that we can do that solidarity, learning together, the more we can deepen the growth. So rock on, here we are into question and answer time. But before I do that, we just wanted to read an excerpt from one of the framing pieces that we rewrote. And this is written by the group working on this evolving edge and wanting to resource the network and even more broadly with anti-oppressive resources. And so Molly Brown and Joanna Macy wrote the Choosing the Story We Want for Our World. That's part of this text and others. And Patricia St. Onge, Kirk Huwald, myself, and Arya Shell, along with others, helped to put into words to see if we might be able to create the transformation on paper that can then help to spur the transformation in the workshops. I'm just going to read excerpts, and yes, you can both get a copy of Harvesting the Gifts of Our Ancestors by Anne Marie Davis, as well as this. They are available and becoming ever more available through the website channels of the Work That Reconnects, and you can get in touch with us through the network as well. We are accessible. You'll hear some things that you remember and resonate, and maybe a few turns of phrases. They can make a big difference. So it goes like this. It is deep in the human psyche and the vast panoply of human cultures to tell ourselves stories about our world. A story is the lens by which a group interprets and controls its experience, creating meaning according to the values its members hold and most deeply believe. A story may be largely unconscious and unquestioned, and even assumed to be the only reality, although no story is inherently complete. We authors recognize 3 stories commonly held in the industrialized world today: business as usual, the great unraveling, and the great turning. All 3 are boiled down simplifications of global realities. Nevertheless, taken together, we can offer a useful perspective on the values and beliefs prevalent in the world today. We have found it helpful in workshops to present these stories as all happening right now, in the sense that they all are true. Looking through the lenses of these stories can strengthen our understanding of today's social, political, and economic dynamics, as well as our commitment to the collective liberation and the living earth. Business as usual is the story of the industrial growth society and the European-based colonial empires from which it emerged. It is the dominant enforcing mechanism of a predatory capitalist imperious economic system. In other words, the corporate financial, military, industrial complex that perpetuates patriarchy and white supremacy for the profit and power of a few. It goes on from there. The Great Unraveling is a story told by scientists, journalists, and activists who have not been bought off or intimidated, drawing attention to the disasters caused by business as usual. Their accounts give evidence of the ongoing derangement and collapse of biological, ecological, economic, and social systems. The Great Unraveling may be more apparent today because of the accelerating rate of change and technological advances in communication, but the living systems of Earth have been unraveling for generations. And under colonial expansion and rule, Indigenous, Brown, Black, and impoverished communities have carried the weight of unraveling for centuries. Refineries, mines, and toxic waste have been sited in or near their communities, with direct and lethal impacts on the health of the people. The story of the Great Turning we hear from some who see the Great Unraveling and don't want it to have the last word. It involves the emergence of new and creative human responses, as well as a reawakening of sustainable indigenous traditions that propel the transition from the industrial growth society to a life-sustaining society. Attitudes shift from exploitation to respect, from extraction to regeneration, from competition to cooperation. More and more of us come to see how we are interwoven together as peoples, and that solidarity with one another is a way through these crises. So we join together to act for the sake of life on Earth. Through this, I hope that you can see both the continuity and discontinuity. How it holds the integrity and it opens up through words, other worlds and ways of perceiving those 3 stories. If you really like that and you're thirsty for more, there is a group that meets just about every other Thursday, 1st and 3rd Thursday of the month, with a bonus on the 5th Thursday, if that month has it, around 10 a.m. Pacific time. And we get together and we support each other primarily as we do this work. We also sort a lot of what we've seen and sort through writing as well as we craft practices and as we think about ways of translating this work into various communities and into our own lives. And right now, in fact, we are led by Siping Chen as we do additional significant writing pieces, using actually the spiral as a guide for how we think about some of the latest publications and how we might want to add and change, modify, contribute many voices to the ongoing development of the written pieces of the Work That Reconnects. And Aravinda has been the backbone of that group. No shade to invertebrates, but the backbone of our group to hold our skeleton together. And I just wanted to definitely give you a shout out there, Aravinda, for the administrative work that you have done. So you can get in touch with that if that sounded really interesting to you and you enjoy to sit in these deep conversations and really go at it. That is one of the many ways. There's also a forum that's happening, and Sylvia helped set that up, and it is more free flow, like conversation, and to be able to deepen in your own way, maybe find a buddy there, and then y'all can take off and really support each other throughout the year. So the network is trying to make more opportunities. So I'll pause there, and we shall head to the questions. And Monica, your mic is accidentally on. Okay, you got it. Good to see you. Shabbat shalom. All right, so first question.
Do you want to start with Aravinda's questions?
I do. Yeah, so here we go. And Aravinda, Joe sent them to you as well, so you can read them as I say, both visual and oral here. Here we go. When there's a microaggression in the group, do you become aware because someone flags it, or is it when you see it happening? And great topic. Thank you for your sensitivity and honesty around this, the person says. And then in addition to that, just take these. You mentioned paying attention to the ways we might be gearing what we have to do towards to keep white identified people comfortable. For those of us who haven't been able to do the readings yet, can you or others give us some examples of what that looks like? So both those are to Arvind, and then also Rachel or Mutima will chime in on one of those. Then after that, we'll go to one other set of questions or so.
All right, thanks for those questions. For the microaggressions topic, sometimes I notice them, sometimes I don't. I certainly notice ones that are relevant to some of my identities, like people touching my hair without permission, but I don't notice all racial microaggressions or microaggressions of any topic. So I've done a lot with just learning about the experiences of other people. There's a piece of writing by David Sue that has this great chart of common racial microaggressions that I really appreciate. I also really appreciate Patricia St. Ange's book, Embracing Cultural Competency, just to for myself to learn more and be able to notice and catch more. But I don't expect myself to be able to catch everything. One of the mechanisms that facilitation teams that I often work with have built in is having an official feedback collector. And so that's a person who's not in a lead facilitation role with content and process, who has announced at the beginning of the workshop that you can bring feedback to them. There's other ways you could do it, like you could have a box or something like that, but it's just like normalizing at the beginning that you're open to feedback. And so that's a place where people can go and share if they've experienced a microaggression. So yeah, any ways that you can build in mechanisms for collecting feedback is a way to be able to hear and know that microaggressions are happening, and then figure out how you'd like to respond to them. And then for the piece about some examples of things done to keep white identified people comfortable, I'll just give one and then I'll pass it over. I've been doing a lot of work with what kind of guidelines, agreements can help support a community in leaning into this work of undoing oppression in our time together. And so one of the things that I really focus on is communication. And I didn't come to this all on my own. It was like brought to my attention because at first I put in a guideline that was normalizing what could be more like white culture forms of communication with like not interrupting people when they're speaking. And so different cultures have different styles and of what deep listening can look like. Some can be like much more interactive and whatnot. So there's lots of factors there, but that's just one example of a place to be careful about like making the norm of the group something that might be a comfortable practice in terms of dominant white culture.
Over to Mutima or Rachel, if there's anything you'd like to add. And Joe, if you could just keep all of us panelists unmuted this whole time, that'd be great. Thank you for your tech service. And Mutima, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I can't unmute Mutima for some reason.
I just wanted to say that in the reading, there is a article about how white supremacy shows up in organizations. And I think that that would answer this question.
And another question coming to us. A facilitator is asking, when I set up the physical, not Zoom room, I always keep an extra spot empty for people and creatures who aren't physically in the room, especially those indigenous to the land that we are on. Listening to your beautiful thoughts today, I wonder if that symbolic space could be useful to address harm that arises, even though no one in the room is directly harmed. What do you think?
That's a beautiful thought. I think that I've been trained in restorative justice circles. And in some of those practices, there is a chair that is always left open for the ancestors. And yeah, I can imagine that because we're saying that harm's going to happen because we're still decolonizing ourselves, it might be a way to have people relax if you've got a chair there for it. I would just want to make sure that if you were to do that, in some other circles, when harm is done, the person who it's done to can say just an ouch, and then everybody would give them that attention. But I wouldn't, I just want to make sure that if you do have a chair there, that it doesn't just sit on the chair, that you still deal with it within the group dynamics.
I know, excuse me if this is, but many lands that we are on still actually have indigenous people on them, and in the invisibilization of our indigenous communities, many people think that they need to leave an open seat for the indigenous people of that land, but you might actually be able to fill it.
Yeah.
Just
invite them in.
Yeah, like actually invite people from those lands who are alive now to sit in that seat, and maybe leave another one for the ancestors who aren't there. But I just noted that.
Thank you all. And last question for this moment, because it's a lifetimes of conversation. Do we think having facilitators from the global minority and global majority working together could be a model for managing all of this? Have a co-facilitation model in some way, shape, or form? Or... Yeah, what have you found energizing? And I actually said energizing rather than managing. I just actually want to notice that I already made a switch. It's not possible for us to manage it or control it even, but bear witness, and see what other power and energy we might be able to harness for ourselves to address it. But might co-facilitation with people from different life experiences, different positionality, be a strategy?
Absolutely, I think. I think that the most important thing is that if you're going to be working with somebody that's even a co-facilitator of your same race, that you have to get the time to get to know that person so that you guys are really co-facilitating together. Because if the microaggressions are going to be there, if racism is going to be there, and you're in a co-racial group, when you get triggered, how are you going to support each other? That transparency is so much a teaching moment and a learning experience. And it's so important. So if you have done your work on your own self from both groups, from all groups, if you've done your own work and you know, and you're proud about the blood that flows through your veins, you're not envious or jealous because somebody else has their culture, they've got their language, they've got their food, they've got, you know, if you've done your own work. So I always say that diversity work is self-esteem work. So once you really do your own work, then you can co-facilitate with anyone. But if you haven't, then you're going to be triggered in front of the group, and it could be a bunch of teachable moments, and you might not get to do the topic. So I think that the most important thing is to be ready and to work together, to get to know each other as co-facilitators so that you're having a shared experience.
Thank you all. Just one last quick scan if there is anything else from anyone on the panel.
Joe, are you going to make the announcement about the caucuses that are coming up?
Can you share about that right now?
Sure. So on August the 9th, Molly Brown is going to host a caucus for the white facilitators or people who want to talk about anything that's come up from this webinar, or how you're feeling about these times. And myself, Taeping, Nurmala, and Dima are going to host a People of the Global Majority caucus at the same time. And yeah, so that's it. And
What time?
12 to noon, 12 to, well, I'm on Texas time. What time is it, Joe?
It'll be 10 a.m. to noon Pacific time.
Yeah.
And we will send the registration information in the follow-up email.
Thank you.
And before we hand it back to the weavers to close with some final screen shares, just want to end in gratitude for these moments together. Want to honor the pain for the world that we've been feeling throughout. That pain that shows up in such intimate spaces of our bodies. Now we've dwelt really starting to perceive in new and ancient ways what we're called to do at this moment and how we're called to be. And knowing that we're not alone, but in the depth of time, off of the linear colonial timeline into the depth of present. That is the freedom of this moment despite everything. And so as you go forth, may what does not serve you wash off of you like water off a duck's back, and what can embolden you to be your passionate, full, humble self, may it sink deep into your cells until we meet again around the spiral.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all so much. I just want to thank you from the Work That Reconnects Network for holding this space together and for being willing to hear and listen and consider this important work. And thank you so much to each one of the panelists, presenters today, to Sarah, Mutima, Aravinda, and Rachel. Thank you for being here and being willing to share with us in this way. Please visit the workthatreconnects.org if you're curious for any more of these resources and to see more opportunities to engage with webinars and conversation cafes. And please look out for that follow-up email. It might take a minute to get it out to you because there's going to be a lot of resources in it. So just keep an eye out in your inbox in the next couple of days. Okay, thank you all so much. Blessings.
Blessings.